Hello, everyone. It's Religious Fanboy here again, and today we are discussing the Christian lessons and themes that are paralleled in the anime series Sonny Boy. A quick disclaimer: we aren't gonna talk about episode 1 very much, um, but there is disclaimer necessary for that. There is a scene of someone who, due to him forcing himself based on the rules of the world they're in to do an embarrassing punishment, he takes his clothes off and does what appears to be jump squats. Nothing is explicit is shown. We only see him do this from the back. But besides that, I don't have many other disclaimers. It does cover a bit more heavier material. Not necessarily inappropriate topics, but specifically topics of positivity and the enemy's use of negativity to, in the sake of what we're talking about today, to decrease our ability and willingness to follow Jesus. And with that being said, this video is a bit different in format. The talking points primarily focus on three main illustrations that we are taking from the series, and three Bible verses that talk about the central themes of the sermon. The main lesson for this is that God calls us to have hope and not grow weary, regardless of how bad the present circumstances may be. Our first Bible verse for this video comes to us from the book of Galatians, chapter 6, verse 9 and 10, which says, "Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap, if we do not give up. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are of the household of faith." In our lives, and at different seasons of our lives, we all face difficult seasons of life and struggles and tragedies, but especially as the church, in how the members of the body of the church are to function, it is our job to not always provide solutions, because God will provide those solutions in the time that is appropriate for solutions to be made. But God does call us to, through Scripture, to celebrate with those who are celebrating and mourn with those who mourn. And because both of these times are experiences that everyone faces, and that everyone benefits from experiencing together in order to better grow in our relationships with God, and in order for the church and the Christians and all people who believe and follow Jesus to become more like Jesus. The main illustration is the way the main character in the series, Nagara, is both able to encourage the other characters around him, but also we see this in the ways in which he is prevented from going into despair due to his friends that he both had and became friends with during this difficult time. Continuing to encourage him and give him hope when he is incapable of providing that for himself or others. And our second Bible verse is 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. It says, "Having the appearance of godliness, but denying its power, avoid such people, for among them are those who creep into households and capture weak women burdened with sin and led astray by various passions." This verse, in the context of the illustration, and how we're going to talk about it, is the destructive force of false prophets, and how these are one of the main tools the enemy likes to use in order to give legitimacy to the enemy's lies that will either drag us into despair if we're not already in despair in difficult seasons of life, or will sadly be the thing that we struggle to overcome on our way out of despair. And the main illustration from the anime that we are discussing is the character Aki, and how she uses her negative attitude and her charisma to deceive other people into thinking she's a teacher in order to gain power, and how this negatively impacts the other people that are trapped in these other worlds due to, in contrast to Nagara and his friends, where they are continuously trying to give each other and those around them hope of things being better and them being able to eventually return home. Aki acquires power and influence due to feeding on the other students' hopelessness, and is able to take advantage of this for her own means and for the sake of increasing her own realm of influence. Not unlike how the enemy, Satan, likes to use lies and deception. Jesus in Scripture even refers to Satan or the enemy as the father of lies. And when there are charismatic false prophets, it becomes easier, the more people are exposed to them, to believe the enemy's lies. And our Bible verse, our third verse, is 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 3 through 4. Where it says, "For time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears they will acclimate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths." This applies to the struggles. This parallels the struggles with many of the characters in this show, but specifically, I want to touch upon one of the episodes for this, where they realized that a bunch of these students that were kind of social outcasts didn't really have support systems or friends, ended up in this trance where they were both paralyzed but could not stop streaming until people had noticed them, and they felt heard enough to where they were willing to leave the despair and exile that they both were trapped in, but also willingly chose to be in, because they felt they had no other purpose or reason for being where they were. And in difficult seasons of life, and this can happen at any time, this could happen due to tragedies or a loss of job, loss of a loved one, or an illness. But it is important that actually in time, I also relate to this verse, in times when I've struggled and had a hard time understanding why I was in the season of life that I'm in, or that I was in, led to me being pretty angry with God at times due to not knowing the answer. And because of this, I made the grave mistakes of taking from not prioritizing prayer or Bible reading as much. And because of this, I didn't only make it so I was mentally not in a good space to hear what God had to say, but I made it even more difficult for me to be in an environment for a prolonged period of time to be able to hear what God had to say. But thank you to God for how God in my life has put amazing Christian friends in my life. One of my friends from Greenville, one of my main compliments about him is that he can tell me whatever God is trying to tell me at that moment, especially when I am too frustrated to hear what God has to say in that moment. And just some text analysis why the second verse would bring up weak women. We could assume or infer based on this context that they would be referring to anyone who is especially vulnerable. And this could both imply, like we've said, to people who are at low seasons in our lives, but also it can happen to people who are at perceived peaks in their life with Christ. A common phrase is that the enemy attacks Christians often the hardest when they are in positions of doing the most good and reaching the most people for Christ. And with that being said, since many preachers and people who actively work in ministry kind of recovering from the busyness still of Easter, if you know people in ministry, please be praying for them. And also, if there's anything that you'd like prayer for, please let me know. And with that being said, special thanks to Christ Church again for allowing us to record in their sanctuary. In the description for this video, there are links to donate to the Casas Christos Christ Church mission trip that me and a group of my family and friends will be going on, as well as to Christ Church, where there is a link that will allow you to set up one-time giving as a financial thank you for their support. Or you can also set up reoccurring giving, whether that be weekly or monthly. And with that being said, may God be with you, and I'll see you next time. Bye.